Welcome to the Behind the Bar podcast. Today we're joined by Meg Stone, also known as MegIsUnemployed on TikTok and other social media platforms. If you could just introduce yourself and say what you do.
Yeah, sure. So it's always hard to do an introduction for yourself. It's like, what do I leave in?
Yeah.
What do I say? But I'm Meg. I go by MegIsUnemployed on TikTok. I mostly make comedy videos, but sometimes I get a bit bored and I'll just make videos about other things like sobriety. That's kind of why I'm here today. So I've been sober for a year and about 5 months, I think. And what else about me? I like doing crosswords. That's a fun fact.
Are you good at crosswords though?
I like to think I am, but if you take a look at the crossword book in my bag, you might see most of them are half done.
Right. I can't do crosswords because I don't know enough general knowledge to fill them in, but I like strands.
Strands? What strands?
Or is this the new Wordle game?
Oh, I'm obsessed with Wordle. If there's a new game, I need to get involved with it.
Strands is good. You should try strands.
I'm going to Google it.
Anyway, so you have been sober for nearly a year and a half. What made you decide to be sober, go sober, stop drinking?
There are so many reasons. But I feel like one of the main reasons is that I've never really had a really positive relationship with alcohol. I think that I was always someone that got very, very emotional when I drank. So, you know, when you go to a bar or a club and you see that one girl towards the end of the night, she's like sloppy drunk, crying in the corner.
Yeah.
That was me. And I would often wake up the next day and just have the worst anxiety. Even if I hadn't really done anything bad at all, I'd wake up and think, oh my God, what did I say to everyone? What did I do? Are there any terrible photos or videos of me online somewhere? And I would just panic. And even if I'd ask my friends, like, what did I do last night? They'd be like, you were fine. You were telling everyone you loved them. You were dancing. You were crying a bit towards the end, but you were fine. But it still wouldn't make me feel better. So for days, I would just feel terrible. I would really feel so anxious and just panic. And I found that it just wasn't worth it for me anymore. I think as well, like with alcohol, I really used it as a crutch to socialise. If I was going anywhere to like a work event, on a date, to meet my friends, I would need to like drink. Sometimes I'd pre-drink as well. And I think that it just wasn't a healthy thing. It was just really bad for my mental health. So those are kind of the reasons why I decided to stop drinking. And yeah, haven't looked back since.
And when did you start drinking?
I think I started drinking probably at age 15. Like a lot of teenagers, you know, you go and drink in a field with your friends and tell your parents you're having a sleepover or something like that. So yeah, about 15. And I really remember vividly, like the first time I got drunk, because I was like, wow, this is a magic potion. It makes me able to dance. I can talk to anyone. I can feel like completely free and like free of anxiety. And I remember thinking like, am I allowed to drink this every day? Like, this is going to be great. This is going to make me just a new person. So yeah, about 15. And I was like a binge drinker. I would just drink a lot. Every time I went out, I would drink more and more. So yeah, I drank for about 11 years, I think, because I quit when I was 26.
Yeah.
So over a decade of messy memories.
Yeah. Obviously, starting at 15 and then stopping at 26, you have a lot of, well, I would say memories. I assume you don't really remember much of that time. Is there a specific point that like you woke up one day and you're like, no, this is it, I need to stop? Or was it a gradual shift towards I should cut down or I should stop completely?
In a way, a bit of both. I think over the years, I would have like, every few months I'd have a really, really bad time where I just feel like I messed up and I was just in an absolute state. And then I would be able to moderate a little bit for a few months, but I'd always end up going back to that same cycle. And I think one of the last times was when, I think it was the Euros, or maybe it was the World Cup. I think it was the World Cup. And I like watching football, so I would go with my friends to the pub, watch the football. And it was when England played France and England lost. And I'd been day drinking with my friends all day. Apparently, when England lost, I started crying in the pub, which I do not remember at all. And then the last thing I remember was being in the bar. And then the next thing, I just found myself down a random road by myself. And my phone went off and I answered it. And I remember listening to the words that were coming out of my mouth. And it was just complete nonsense. And I was like, how did I get here? What's going on? And basically, I kept blacking out on the way home. And it was literally like I would be in one street. it was like someone clicked and I just found myself on another street. And it was really starting to scare me because I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to black out in a minute and not know where I am. And that happened like several times on my way home. And then eventually I got home. I couldn't get my key in the door. My flatmate came to the door because I was obviously making such a racket. And he opened the door and I just burst into tears because I was just so drunk. And then the next day I was so anxious, and I was anxious for about a week. And I just thought, okay, I've been drinking for 11 years. I clearly can't moderate. This type of thing keeps happening, so I need to stop. And that was the last time I got really, really drunk. And then I stopped drinking. I think it was on New Year 2022, perhaps. I think, if that's the right year, I'm not really sure. But yeah, that was the last time.
Now that you have stopped drinking, do you still find yourself like hanging out with the same people, or have you changed friend groups? Do they still react the same way? Like when you say, "Oh, I'll come out tonight, but I'm not going to be joining in. I'm going to be on the, I don't know, low and no or a Coke instead."
I think I'm really lucky with my friends in London. They're really great people. They're really understanding. And they know that I'm not going to be drinking. They know never to like try and persuade me to drink or do anything like that. And I've really found since going sober, when I talk to people and say that I'm sober, people actually often express an interest in sobriety themselves, or they say, oh, I've cut down this year, or I'd really like to cut down. And people are really supportive. They don't try and persuade you to drink, at least not in my experience. So I must have been like quite lucky with the people I've surrounded myself with. But also I think being in London is quite different. You get to meet people from like all sorts of backgrounds and people who just aren't that interested in drinking. Whereas where I grew up on the Isles of Scilly, it's a group of islands in Cornwall, the drinking culture there is pretty crazy. Everybody drinks. There's not a lot to do. So I think if I'd quit when I was there, I would have found it a lot more difficult. But yeah, in London, people are a lot more open to different lifestyles, different ways of life. Yeah. So I haven't found it that difficult, or I haven't felt pressured into drinking at all.
Yeah. Have you found that drinking culture has changed in the past few years? Like a lot less people are drinking in general? Or?
I think so. I think especially the younger generations. I believe Gen Z is the generation who's least likely to drink.
Yeah.
They're really cutting down. They're really favouring like low and no over drinking alcohol. And I think that's really great to see. It's great to see people being more conscious. And I think the reason why Gen Z are cutting down is that they're a very conscious generation. They're really conscious about their health. They're conscious about the effects of alcohol, and also the way they're perceived by other people. So I think back in the day, like alcohol used to have this real thing of like, oh, it's cool to get absolutely blackout.
Yeah.
The stories are really funny of like, oh yeah, I was like lying on the pavement in my own vomit, ha ha ha. Whereas like Gen Z are a bit more like, no, we need to look after our physical and mental health. And I think especially like there's so much talk about mental health these days. It's not as taboo as it was before. And if you say to someone from a younger generation, oh, I'm cutting down on my drinking because the alcohol is really affecting me mentally, they're like, okay, that makes total sense. So I feel like there's a lot less judgment around it. So we're definitely seeing a lot more options in low and no alcohol as well, which is great because you can just go out now and you can have like an alcohol-free cocktail or an alcohol-free beer or wine even. So yeah, it's definitely changing. Although I will say, I think when you're a drinker and you surround yourselves with other people that drink, that world is a little bit invisible.
Yeah.
I know that when I was a drinker, I was under the impression that everybody drank the same way that I did. It wasn't that much of a problem. Everyone would go out and get blackout drunk on the weekends. It was totally normal. But then since going sober, I've realised, oh, there's a huge community of people that don't drink. And I meet people that don't drink all the time. So I think it's something that it's all about perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I think... because I was at uni a few years ago now, which is sad to say there's been a few years, but I think when I was there, because I'm not really a drinker, I only drink on like if there's an occasion. And even if there is an occasion, I like to get tipsy and that's it. I like to feel relaxed, but I don't want to reach the point of like, I can't control what I'm doing or I'm going to forget the next morning. It's just to feel comfortable around the other people I'm with. And when I had this impression at university, because like from TV and movies, like, oh, everyone drinks and like goes crazy at uni. But actually there's like a decent amount of people, and I could find myself with a crowd of people that don't drink or just have like one drink a night, and that'll be it. And they're happy just to not drink. So I think it is growing, or it is becoming more popular to not drink a lot, or at least not drink at all, which is nice to see. Have you tried a no alcohol cocktail or beer?
Yeah, so the thing about me is that I actually really used to like the taste of alcohol.
Mm.
I find that a lot of people, even drinkers, they're like, I don't really like the taste of alcohol, I just drink it because I want to get drunk.
Yeah.
But I liked the taste of wine, I liked the taste of beer, same with cocktails. So when I went sober, it was really important to me that I could actually have different options. So if I go to the pub now, I'll have like an alcohol-free Peroni or a Lucky Saint or something like that. And to me, it tastes the same as like alcohol, beer with alcohol. And same with cocktails. Like I love a spicy margarita, and you can get the same thing just without alcohol, and it really does taste the same to me. Some people say you can taste the difference, but
Yeah.
I don't think you can.
What's your current drink of choice?
I would say Lucky Saint or Peroni 0.0, but I've heard that Guinness has made alcohol-free Guinness, and I really want to try that. So
I've heard it's good.
I need to give it a go.
Do you still go to the pub a lot then? If you're not drinking as much, but you'll go for like the social aspect of going to a pub?
Yeah, so I would say in my first year of sobriety, it was a little bit more difficult going to the pub because I think I really associated it with drinking, with getting really drunk. And when you go to a pub sober, you suddenly just become really aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
It can be a bit tricky at the start because you feel a bit more anxious because you haven't got that like comfort blanket of drinking the alcohol. So I did find it tricky in my first year, but I did still go. I usually went in the daytime. Like if my family came up to visit, I'd go with them, or, you know, go and sit in a beer garden or something. So I could still go, but I found it quite tricky. But I will say, like, recently, I've been really enjoying it. So at the weekend, for example, it was my friend's birthday on Saturday. We went to the pub at 4:30. We didn't leave till like 10 p.m. And then after that, I went with my friends to a rooftop bar, and I was out until like 1 a.m. And I feel like if you'd have told me that when I was 18, like, oh yeah, in a few years you won't be drinking, but you'll be in the pub for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours, I'd have thought that's crazy. Yeah. But I think I'm just starting to really see the fact that the pub is a social environment. You don't have to be drunk to be there. You don't even have to have like alcohol to be there. You can just be there with your friends. It's a great chance to socialize. And I feel like, especially in London, something that I'm really like passionate about talking about is the fact that with housing these days for like people in their 20s and 30s, you're often in shared accommodation and there's no communal area. There's no lounge, there's no living room, there's nothing because landlords turn them into bedrooms. So people are really lonely these days. You can't socialise with your housemates. You can't invite people around to your house because what, you're going to sit 6 of you in your like tiny bedroom? I don't think so. My bedroom's tiny. There's not enough room to swing a cat, let alone have people around. So I feel like it's important to have these spaces where you can go and socialise. And the pub has always been somewhere in my life that I've loved to socialise with friends, with family. And so I feel like it's super important that I feel comfortable going there. And I really do. I think it's very much like a mental thing. Once you get over that association of like, oh, I've got to be really drunk to be there, you just get used to it and then it's fine.
Do you think, I don't know if you've been to any like pubs that are more experience led, like have events rather than just a place to drink and eat. Do you think that that's a way to bring more people into pubs, specifically people that don't drink? Like they'd rather have, you know, play games or have some competitive socializing instead of just drinking. Is that something that you've experienced? Have you visited any pubs that do that?
I think it's a really good idea. I don't think I've been to many that have done like events, but I think it would be a great thing to do because it takes your focus off the drinking.
Yeah.
And if you can do something like whether it be a pub quiz or a game night, or like even with me and my friends, sometimes we bring something to do, like a crossword or some cards or something. And that means like you're really involved and you're focusing on what you're doing and like playing the game rather than worrying about, oh, do people know that I'm not drinking? Oh no, are there going to be lots of drunk people around? So I think it's a really good idea. I think it would be a great way to bring people in. Even like when they screen things, like screening like football matches. And one thing I really think they should do is screen the final of Love Island in pubs. I think people would love that. So I think they need to look into that. But yeah, I do think that having events and having something that can draw your focus away from the drinking aspect, I think that can really bring people in.
Yeah. And from someone who has gone sober for over a year and you still go to pubs, what would you say to someone that is going through the same thing and is maybe wary about going to environments where there's a lot of drinkers and alcohol involved?
I think one of the main things is to surround yourself with the right people. Like, you need to be going to pubs with friends who understand that you're sober, who understand your situation, and that get that you might be there for 10 minutes and then decide it's a bit too overwhelming and that you want to go home. So having people that really understand your sobriety and understand your needs, that's really important. Like, my friends are really understanding. They know that sometimes I might get a bit overwhelmed and not want to stay out too long, or that they might understand that I don't want to be in a bar or a pub that's super packed. I prefer to be in like more of a spacious like beer garden, like outside, something like that. So I think it's surrounding yourself with the right people. That's really important. The last thing you want to do, especially if you're recently sober, is go to the pub with a friend who, you know, after 2 drinks is going to be like, oh, should we get a bag in? Like, you don't want to do that. You want to really go with the right people. So I think that's the main thing. And then also I think some people don't always feel that comfortable talking about their sobriety. Me personally, I love it. I love talking about it. But some people, they just feel a bit uncomfortable and a bit awkward. So I think one thing to do is kind of like blend in. So if you're drinking like an alcohol-free beer, a lot of the time people don't even realise.
Yeah.
So having that in your hand, it does feel like a comfort, and that can really help. And then, like you said about events, going to pubs where you've got something to focus on, like a pub quiz, where some event is being screened. And then I think as well, just going to the same place quite frequently. So I usually like to go to somewhere like the first time in the daytime to kind of check it out, see what it's like, see what the environment's like. And then if I like it, I might come back on an evening. But I don't think it's a good idea if you've quit drinking for your first night out to be starting at 10 p.m. at like a really, really busy pub. It's probably not the best way to ease yourself in. So I think just being really conscious of the environment, being conscious of who you go with, and just setting yourself some boundaries. Like, I think a lot of the main thing for people often who have quit drinking is actually stepping out the door and going. So I always say to myself, if I'm feeling anxious about socializing somewhere, I'll just say, I can always leave. I can literally get there and I can leave straight away. And I never do, because I get there and I end up having a really fun time. So just, being kind to yourself, giving yourself those boundaries, I think those are really great things to do.
I would say, like, how would you make sure you don't feel left out in a group of people that do drink? But you seem to have surrounded yourself with a group of people that don't mind if you're drinking or not. If you did find yourself in a situation where you're with a lot of drinkers and they possibly don't understand why you've gone sober, do you feel like you'll be left out, or do you feel like you're pushed aside because of that? Or would you rather remove yourself from that situation and find someone else that's accepting that you're not drinking, you're not a drinker?
That's quite an interesting question. Because, like you said, I've been quite lucky with the people I surround myself with. They just are completely understanding. But if I think about going back to my hometown, where it's very common for like everyone to be really, really drunk, I think I can imagine people might be like, oh, it's really boring, or you used to be so much fun. And I think that would be quite tricky. I think the best thing to do in that situation is, if you feel like they're really not going to understand, is just to walk away. Because I feel like for people like that, they just don't understand. They don't really empathize with it. Or maybe they will at some point in the future. Because I feel like, to be honest, when I was a drinker, I probably would have been like, oh, you're boring. And now I realize, like, no, it's not boring. Like, if it's making you feel overwhelmed, then I would just walk away from it. Because there's always going to be people that are more understanding. And I think as well, you can try and steer the conversation away from alcohol. Like, sometimes you'll find you'll be in a situation where everyone's talking about alcohol and you think, I'd rather talk about something else. So trying to steer the conversation away from that. But also I think one good thing is to make new sober friends, because being sober doesn't have to be boring. I feel like since I've gone sober, I actually do more things. I go out more. I'm more social. So I feel like if you join something like in London, actually I think they do events in Manchester and Bristol as well, but there's something called the Sober Girl Society. They run different events online and in person. So one of the events last year was a dry disco around Christmas, and it was in Ministry of Sound, and it was like a day-long sort of clubbing event, and everyone there is not drinking. Everyone's having a great time, socialising, dancing, doing things that if you looked in, you'd think, oh, they're, just having a normal clubbing day out. So I think finding sober friends and making new friendships is something that's really valuable, and being ready to sort of let go of sort of maybe some toxic friendships. Because I think when you drink, sometimes you realise with your friends the only thing you have in common is that you both drink. And if you remove alcohol from the situation, you realise, oh, okay, maybe we don't have that much in common. So I think when you stop drinking, find some sober friends. Doesn't mean you have to cut everyone out in your life, but just sort of like review the friendships and see who should sort of stick around.
And so on your TikTok, you mostly post comedy videos, memes, follow the trends. What made you decide to do a series on sobriety and your choice and stop drinking? Like, obviously it was a big shift. It's more of a serious tone compared to everything else on your account. What made you decide to post about it?
So I always go against the grain with like the main piece of advice for content creation. So when you're starting to be a content creator, everyone tells you like find your niche and stick to that niche. But I get bored quite easily. So I will make most of my content about comedy, but every now and again I want to talk about something else. And for me, it was approaching like a year that I'd been sober, and I feel like it was just such a great achievement for me. It's something that, not to sound cliche, but really changed my life in such a good way.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to celebrate it and share that with people. So I think the first post I did was like celebrating 1 year sobriety, and I had lots of really nice comments. The reaction was really positive, and I had some questions about my sober journey. So I decided to make some videos about it. I think I did some about why I went sober, how I did it, the good things I found about being sober, giving people advice. And I just think it's really important to share stories like that, especially because we have this idea of sobriety about only being sober if you had a really, really serious problem with alcohol.
Yeah.
Like we picture like this kind of stereotypical image of like an old man in his 50s who's shaking because he's drinking vodka at like 8 a.m. Whereas really drinking and having a drinking problem, it's such a spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think people feel a sense of like imposter syndrome. I know I certainly did. I was like, am I allowed to say I'm sober? Like, is it really sobriety? Like, should I even go sober? I think people as well who've been around you while drinking, they might have only seen the positive fun side of you. They don't realize that when you go home, you feel like shit and you're crying for hours, or that you have anxiety for days afterwards. So you kind of worry when you're going sober that people are going to be like, you don't need to do that. Why don't you just moderate? So I feel like sharing my journey and my story, maybe people who are like me could say, oh, okay, I can go sober, even if I just have like I don't want to say minor drinking problem, but like, even if I'm not like a full-blown alcoholic.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I don't think I've asked you, but did you ever work in hospitality, have any experience in a pub or any like place where they serve alcohol?
I worked in hospitality between the ages of 16 to 19. So I worked in like a cafe bistro.
Yeah.
And I basically was doing that in the summer season between like college and university. And that was a lot of alcohol in that environment. Like, number one, like serving alcohol in the evenings, of course, but also I think anyone that's worked in hospitality knows that often there's a lot of drinking involved with your colleagues. Because I think with hospitality as well, you often work like quite long hours. It's quite hard work. So you become quite close with the people that you work with. And one of the main ways of socializing, as we know, is drinking. So I would be drinking very often with my colleagues. And I had a lot of good memories from that. But also, again, like being messy drunk, coming into work hungover, that was very tricky. I think we all know like the hangover shakes when you're carrying plates out. Yeah. So my experience in hospitality was fun. It was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun at the time.
And did you find that working in an environment where there is alcohol, you found yourself drinking more than you did before? Was that something that you then continued to drink at that level after you left the job? Or was it just during that time period there was like a peak in how much you drank?
I think it was pretty consistent because I started working that job when I was 16 and left when I was 19. And my colleagues were a lot older than me, or most of them were like in their 20s and some of them were in their 30s. And as a teenager, I wanted to impress them. I wanted to be like them. So I would try and drink with them a lot, and I would try and keep up with them. And usually, I mean, for like a really small 16-year-old girl trying to keep up with a chef in his late 20s who's like big and bulky, not going to be able to drink the same amount, but I certainly gave it my best shot. I don't know. I wouldn't say that I necessarily drank a lot more afterwards. I think whether or not, like, regardless of whether I would have worked in hospitality or not, I think it would have been the same because I just was really like generally fascinated by alcohol and the effect it had on me. So, you know, when I was at uni, I was still drinking a lot as well. Whenever I was in my hometown, I was drinking a lot. So I think I would have been that way, whether if I'd worked in hospitality or not.
And what did you study at uni?
I studied French with Hispanic studies.
Oh, okay.
languages. So it's quite random. I feel like my career path's been all over the place. So yeah, I studied French with Hispanic Studies. And then I lived abroad for a couple of years as well as sort of part of my degree. And one thing I noticed when I lived abroad is the way that the UK drinking culture is quite unique. Because in the UK, I felt like I was the slowest of my friends when we were drinking. They'd be like, come on, drink up. Whereas when I was in France and Spain, I feel like I would finish my glass first because you're used to, in the UK, drinking really fast, drinking as much as you can in a short period of time. Whereas in France and Spain, they tend to like enjoy the drinks more.
They savor it, don't they?
They savor it, yeah. So it's very different.
They'll be there for hours and they'll have only a couple glasses, but whereas we stay here and we'll go like somewhere and spend 2 hours there, but like in France or in Europe, they'll be out until midnight at a cafe, which is not something that you do in the UK. But did you enjoy your time abroad? Was it just in France that you were in?
I was in Spain for 8 months, and to be honest, when I was in Spain, I was pretty miserable. I know, I'd love to have said like I had the best time, but I really didn't. I think I just made lots of bad choices. So I lived in a really small town, so everyone my age was in the bigger cities studying, and then I lived alone, and I was 20 at the time, so I was living alone in a small town with no one my age.
Yeah.
And at the time I had a boyfriend that lived in England, so I missed him, classic. And it was just really tricky. But I did drink a lot by myself during that time. I think that's one of the times where I realised that I did quite have like a bad relationship with alcohol, because the thing I would look forward to would be getting a couple of bottles of wine and just drinking by myself in my house, which is quite depressing. But then when I went to France, it was the opposite. I had the best time. I had flatmates that I really got along with, people in my building that I got along with. I really loved the job. The place I lived was nice. So I had a great time there. And I drank a lot there as well. Like the French, they love drinking their wine, so I drink wine quite a lot. But at least I wasn't by myself like in Spain, so it was a lot better that time around.
It was more of a social drinking rather than...
Yeah, more of a social drinking than...
alone in your room.
Than the lonely drinking in my room, yeah.
And what do you do now? Are you still doing anything with languages or hospitality? Is your career jumped again in a different direction?
Yeah, so I've been teaching English online. That's my main job at the moment. My students are from everywhere. They're mostly Spanish and French speaking, because they know I can like sort of help them with English, because I can translate words here and there. I was working as a content creator for a marketing agency up until recently, so I did that for about 6 months. That was a lot of fun. That was one of those jobs where you think, I can't believe this is real. I just got to scroll on TikTok and make TikToks all day. So that was great. But my contract ended with them, so I'm currently in the process of looking for a new job, which is... It's hell. It's not fun. I'm writing a lot of cover letters. Yeah. I'm writing different versions of my CV. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. But I haven't worked in hospitality for a long time now.
If you could be a content creator or work on social media for a pub or a hospitality company, what would you suggest they do to like bring younger people in?
I think one thing that I think would be such a good idea is trying to build community.
Yeah.
So for example, with the pub in my hometown, there's such a sense of community. You have all different generations drinking there. You go there, you know the bar staff, you know like the older people in the pub, you have a little chat with them, your friends will come in, your siblings' friends will be there. So you're really like, everyone's talking to each other. Yeah. And there's a lot of interaction between the generations. And some things that I really like that they have there is they've got picture walls from like decades ago, like pictures of people drinking there. And now they've done a new one. So you've got like the sons and daughters of those people and they've got pictures of them. So I think that sense of community is really nice. So I think that if you shared stories of the different people that drink at the pub and that have drank at the pub before, I think that's a really nice idea. Something like Humans of New York, but like in a pub style. I think that would be a lot of fun. Yeah. That would be cool. And then I think just making different demographics and different type of people feel welcome, putting on different kind of events, like we mentioned earlier, like pub quizzes, games nights, screenings, things like that. And then also, like, for example, during dry January, a lot of people tend to shelter at home during dry January. Yeah. I think they kind of misunderstand the point of it and they sort of just stop doing all types of socializing. Whereas I think it'd be great if pubs encouraged, like, yeah, we've got all these different new options on our menu of like alcohol-free or low alcohol, like come and enjoy them and like you can still socialize. So I think just making sure that they're like advertising to people who might not drink, things like that would be great.
What would your top 3 tips be to someone who is thinking of either cutting down or like going completely sober?
I think number one is have like one person in particular who you really trust, who you know you can talk to about your sobriety journey, and that you know who isn't going to judge you. So I feel like the way I went about going sober was maybe not the best way to do it. So I decided towards the end of 2022 that I was going to give up drinking. But I was like, I'm going to do dry January, and I'm going to tell everyone I'm doing dry January. So I did that. And then it got towards the end of dry January, and I started telling everyone I'm doing dry February. And then when it got to dry March, I was like, what am I going to, in 2 years' time, be like, I'm on dry February of 2026 or whatever. So I think like it was a good way to do it in some senses because I felt like the pressure was off me. But I think it also would have been great in like the very early days to have someone who I could have been like, listen, I'm giving up alcohol for good. Like, can I talk to you about it? And like once I told my friends, I was like, why didn't I tell them earlier?
Yeah.
But I think having at least one person that you know isn't going to judge you, that you know you can talk to about it, that's really important. Number two is don't just go back into your shell. I feel like a lot of people, they just completely stop socializing, but that's not the way forward.
Yeah.
I think when you give up alcohol, it can actually open so many doors. Like, I feel like now I go to loads of different places. I do loads of different things. And I think just finding new ways to socialize is really good. And then you can always go back to like going to the pub and going to bars later on down the line. So I feel like in my first year, I did a lot of going to parks, going to museums, going to cafes. And then the other night I went out 2 nights in a row to the pubs, to the bars, had a great time completely sober. But I think that would have been harder in my first year. So yeah, don't shy away from socializing, continue socializing, and you might end up going back to the places you used to before. And the third tip is see it as a chance to discover new things. Like, I was really stupid and I thought that no and low alcohol didn't really exist.
Yeah.
It does. There are so many different options. In London, there's an alcohol-free bar called Club Soda. That place is amazing. That's where I take all my dates. It's a great place to go on a date. So yeah, just like really do your research, look into it, talk to other sober people. You'll find that there's a huge community of people out there, and people are a lot less judgmental than you think they're going to be.
What was a place that you went to while you were going sober for the first time and then you realised, why haven't I done this before?
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, everywhere I went. Because when I first moved to London, I was drinking at the student bar and I was going out to different bars in Shoreditch. But like in the past year and a half, I've been to so many different museums.
Yeah.
I've been to this place called the Wellcome Collection that I'm obsessed with. I love going there. They have great exhibitions on. Different parks, different walks. There's so much to see in this city. And I feel like when I was drinking, I was a bit blind to it all. But yeah, honestly, there's so many things to do.
Yeah.
So many things.
We have this thing on our podcast where we have someone send in a question, or like a previous guest has asked a question. They don't know who it's going towards. So it's a surprise to us and a surprise to you. But the question that we've got for you is, if you were a cocktail, what cocktail would you be?
If I was answering this when I drank, I would have said a Long Island iced tea, because I feel like it's got so much alcohol in it. And that was me when I was drinking. But now, sober, I would say an alcohol-free spicy margarita, because it's fun, it's not boring, it's exciting, and that's how I feel like I am, even though I'm sober.
Well, thank you for joining us on the podcast. It was very interesting to hear your story. And yeah, everyone should give you a follow.
Yeah.
MegIsUnemployed.
MegIsUnemployed. Hopefully not for much longer. You'll
Yeah.
have a job soon.